Hi, Group One. This is Patty, the TA. I just read through your Google Doc with all your practice recommendations, particularly around AOP and equity infused practices, and that you grasped from the readings. And as I was reading through, there was a couple that really resonated with me and that stuck out that I wanted to comment on. And this was throughout the Google Doc, whether you were talking about policy level or direct service or group work or internal hiring practices, etc. So one is the possession of knowledge, and then and saying, acknowledging that whoever is deemed to hold, right, possess the knowledge does have tremendous advantage. Um, Someone put advice from victims, right, to place kids with kin. So that was kind of centering the voice of the client in determining placement. And this was obviously a child welfare setting. Discuss clients and cases in a respectful way to dispel myths. Create positions that acknowledge the strength of lived experience. To approach each family and community as individuals. To center the voice of those impacted in the center of advocacy work. And all of this to me had a common thread, and that is its most simplest form that um, clients and communities themselves are the best experts on their own lived experience. That being said, it made me think of particularly the direct service setting, and how hard it is to um, well, let me back up. I think often in direct service, we inherit a case from someone else, and so that means someone actually passed us a physical paper file that we read through about the client. So we're getting to know them, or the first impression of them is the case file, or we inherit it from our coworker. So our coworker meets with us to tell us about their experience the last year in working with the client, or perhaps our supervisor asks us to take on a new case from a different team or department or something, and so your supervisor is telling you about the client. And so all of this is creating the first impression, and all of this is not the voice of the client themselves, and that's problematic. And so I think what I saw here in your different intervention, your practice recommendations, was identifying that being an anti-oppressive practitioner means one of the things that it means is trying our best to find ways in which we can center our work in the actual stories and voices of those we're serving or being impacted, right? So again, bringing this to the direct service setting, I think about how can we challenge ourselves um, to have the client's story themselves, like their story in their own words, be the central narrative from which we begin to do work with them, that we begin to partner with them. Um, what kind of a shift, um, what kind of an impact does that shift has? And I think it's a tremendous one, and it's an anti-oppressive one. um, if in case of reading that case, instead of reading the case file, we were to engage with them in conversation. What if we had actual clients and community members stories in their own words about their own lived experiences be the beginning narrative, be the first narrative and the central narrative from which we enter into work with them and into a relationship with them. So I think fundamentally that is an anti-oppressive practice. It's one that I saw all of you identify in different ways and forms. And I just wanted to lift that up and say kudos to you for seeing that, and to just talk about how difficult that is in the practice setting, how difficult that is in a direct service setting. So just asking ourselves, how could we cultivate, um, in your own setting, in your own role, how could you cultivate a practice of, number one, when you first meet and or are going to work with a client, how can we have their narrative in their own words be the first impression we have of them? Um, And then also, how do we challenge ourselves to continue to have the client's narrative and lived experience, as told through their own words, be the central narrative with which we work with them? Not to say that we can't and it's not valuable, the perspectives and experiences of others in working with them, but how can we centralize their story through their own words, their lived experience, in how we work with and enter into relationship with them? So that's my food for thought for tonight. All right, good night.